There's an ancient book that talks about fallen angels who had children with human women and giants who walked the earth and secrets about heaven that most people have never heard about. This book was quoted in the Bible itself and was considered scripture by early Christians for hundreds of years. But then something happened and it disappeared from the Bible we know today. I'm talking about the Book of Enoch, and the story of why it was removed is way more fascinating than you might think. Let me start by telling you what the Book of Enoch actually is. This ancient text claims to be written by Enoch, who was the great-grandfather of Noah, and according to Genesis, he was so righteous that God took him directly to heaven without him ever dying. The book describes Enoch's visions and journeys through heaven, where angels showed him the secrets of the universe and the coming judgment of the world. The Book of Enoch is packed with wild stories that sound like they came straight out of a fantasy novel, except people believed this was real scripture for thousands of years. It tells about the Watchers, who were a group of angels sent to watch over humanity, but instead they fell in love with human women and came down to earth and married them. These unions produced the Nephilim, who were giant hybrid creatures that terrorized the world and taught humans forbidden knowledge like warfare and witchcraft and astrology. According to the book, these fallen angels and their giant offspring became so evil and caused so much violence that God decided to wipe out the world with the Great Flood. Only Noah and his family survived because they were still pure and hadn't mixed with the corrupted bloodlines. The book goes into incredible detail about the punishment of these fallen angels and describes 7 heavens and the throne of God and the final judgment that will come at the end of time. Here's what most people don't know about the Book of Enoch, and it was actually super important to early Christians and Jews. The New Testament itself quotes from the Book of Enoch directly. In the book of Jude, verses 14 and 15, you can find a quote that comes word for word from Enoch chapter 1, where it talks about God coming with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment. Early church fathers like Tertullian and Irenaeus and Clement of Alexandria all treated the Book of Enoch as legitimate scripture. They quoted from it in their writings and used it to teach about angels and demons and the end times. For the first few centuries of Christianity, many believers considered Enoch to be just as inspired and authoritative as the books we have in the Bible today. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still includes the Book of Enoch in their Bible to this very day. They have the complete text in their scriptural canon, and they've preserved it for thousands of years, while the rest of the Christian world moved away from it. This shows us that the decision to remove Enoch wasn't universal and wasn't made all at once, but happened gradually over time through a series of debates and church councils. So why did most of Christianity eventually reject the Book of Enoch and remove it from the biblical canon? The answer comes down to several factors that all work together to push this book out of mainstream acceptance. First, there were serious questions about authorship. By the time Christianity was spreading across the Roman Empire, scholars started to doubt that Enoch himself actually wrote this book. They realized it was probably written around 300 to 100 BC, which was thousands of years after the real Enoch would have lived. The book appeared to be pseudepigrapha, which means it was written under a false name to give it more authority and credibility. Second, the theology in the Book of Enoch started to clash with developing Christian doctrine. The book puts enormous emphasis on the story of fallen angels and their role in corrupting humanity. It suggests that evil came into the world primarily through these angelic beings, rather than through human free will and sin. As Christianity developed its theology about original sin and human responsibility, church leaders felt that Enoch's focus on fallen angels distracted from the core message of human redemption through Christ. Third, the Book of Enoch contains detailed descriptions of multiple heavens and elaborate hierarchies of angels and specific names and roles for various spiritual beings. By the 4th and 5th centuries, when the church was trying to standardize its beliefs and fight against various heresies, these detailed angelologies and cosmologies seemed dangerous. Church leaders worried that too much focus on angels and heavenly mysteries would lead people away from focusing on Jesus and the gospel message. Fourth, there was the practical problem of the text itself. The Book of Enoch had been lost in most of the Christian world for centuries. While it survived in Ethiopia, the Greek and Latin copies that European Christians used had disappeared. When church councils were meeting to decide which books belonged in the official Bible, they couldn't include a book that most churches didn't even have access to anymore. You can't canonize a text that nobody can read or verify. The formal rejection of Enoch came through church councils in the 4th century. The Council of Laodicea, around 364 AD, created one of the first official lists of biblical books, and Enoch wasn't on it. Later, the Council of Carthage in 397 AD confirmed the biblical canon that most Western Christians still use today, and once again, the Book of Enoch was excluded from the list. Saint Jerome, who translated the Bible into Latin around 400 AD, was particularly harsh about Enoch. He rejected it completely and refused to include it in his Vulgate translation, which became the standard Bible for Western Christianity for over 1,000 years. Jerome's influence was massive, and his rejection of Enoch basically sealed its fate in the Western Church. St. Augustine, who was probably the most influential theologian in early Christianity, also had doubts about Enoch. He acknowledged that the book was ancient and that some people considered it scripture, but he ultimately concluded that it couldn't be trusted because of questions about its age and authorship, and because it wasn't preserved by the Jewish communities who had maintained the Old Testament scriptures. The Book of Enoch was essentially lost to the Western world for over 1,000 years, until the 18th century, when a Scottish explorer named James Bruce traveled to Ethiopia and brought back 3 copies of the book in 1773. This rediscovery created a sensation among biblical scholars who suddenly had access to this ancient text that had been referenced by early Christian writers but had disappeared from Europe. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 changed everything we knew about the Book of Enoch. Among those ancient manuscripts were multiple copies of Enoch in the original Aramaic language, proving that the book was indeed ancient and that it had been important to Jewish communities around the time of Jesus. Fragments of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, showing that it was being read and copied by Jewish scribes in the centuries before Christianity began. Today, scholars recognize that the Book of Enoch is actually a collection of several different texts written by different authors over a period of about 300 years. There's 1 Enoch, which is the Ethiopian version, and 2 Enoch, which is a Slavonic version, and 3 Enoch, which is a later Hebrew text. These books contain some of the most fascinating Jewish apocalyptic literature from the Second Temple period, and they give us incredible insight into what Jewish people believed about angels and demons and the afterlife during the time when Jesus was alive. The removal of the Book of Enoch from the Bible raises important questions about how we got the Bible we have today and who decided what should be in it and what should be left out. The Bible didn't just fall out of the sky as a complete book. It was assembled over centuries through a long process of debate and discussion and disagreement among religious leaders and communities. Understanding the Book of Enoch helps us understand the New Testament better. When Jesus talks about angels, or when the apostles mention demons, or when Revelation describes cosmic battles between good and evil, they're drawing on ideas and images that were common in Jewish literature like the Book of Enoch. Many concepts we think of as purely biblical actually come from this broader tradition of Jewish apocalyptic writing. Whether you see the exclusion of Enoch as the church wisely protecting itself from questionable texts or as the loss of valuable ancient wisdom depends largely on your perspective about religious authority and biblical interpretation. What we can say for certain is that the Book of Enoch gives us a fascinating window into the religious world of ancient Judaism and early Christianity, and helps us understand that the Bible we have today is the result of centuries of human decisions and debates, and not just a simple collection of obvious sacred texts that everyone always agreed on. The story of Enoch reminds us that religious history is always more complicated and more interesting than we might expect.